All right, so on tonight's regular meeting agenda, we do have some items related to the city's fiscal year 2020 budget, which begins in about 3 weeks on January 1st, 2020. This presentation I'm giving tonight, for the most part, follows similar presentations that we've provided over the last few council meetings, but allows us time to review the proposed budget, answer questions that council and constituents might have. So I'll try to talk fast, but not too fast. So for the purpose of explaining the reasons for the proposed tax levy increase, which is likely a focus of tonight's meeting, would like to review the budget overview presentation that was made on November 11th for any of those people that weren't able to attend or watch from home. Did want to point out Article 18 of Chapter 35 in Section 200 of the Illinois Compiled Statutes provides a framework for the levy and extension process. And so tonight we will be holding a public hearing on the property tax levy since the proposed levy is higher than 5%. We will quickly talk about the goals that we follow when going through the budget process and review total budgeted expenditures and revenues for all the city's funds, but then we will focus on the general fund along with parks fund and library funds, as all of those three are partially funded by the city's property tax levy. So to review our goals, the first directive of the budget process is to prepare balanced budgets in all of our funds. And a balanced budget generally means that revenues exceed expenditures. However, at times we are using fund balance as well. Some of our funds do have challenges, and it's always our goal to keep financial impacts to a minimum and at the same time provide the funds that we need to provide services to our citizens and our business community. It's also always our goal to be fiscally responsible. So we keep that in mind when developing a budget. We did approve financial policies at the November 25th meeting, and it's always contained within our budget. That financial policies provide direction to staff and council regarding our fund balance levels, use of contingency, and what we do with various revenues. So the proposed expenditure budget for all funds of the city is $122,046,571. This chart captures total spending across 9 departments and over 40 active funds. The general fund represents the largest portion there, that light yellow tab, at $38.5 million, followed by the water, sewer, storm, and refuse funds combined together. We often call them our utility funds. That's $26.1 million. As we go around clockwise, about the 7 o'clock point there, economic development, $8.6 million, includes our 7 active TIF districts along with CDBG funds. The next biggest portion is that light blue at the top, all other, and all other includes the marina, our Martin Luther King funds, our gaming funds, and our internal service funds. So $122 million in expenditures. To look at that $122 million a little bit of a different way, this breaks it down into categories. And the largest slice of that pie chart is personnel costs, which make up 42.8% of total expenditures. That's $52.2 million. And of note, that is up 2.6% from last year. Last year, that pie was $50.9 million. And why is that important to note is that we do have wage increases in our 6 union contracts. We have health insurance increases, and pension contributions continue to grow. So pension contributions include police and fire, IMRF, FICA, and Medicare. Police increase, or IMRF increased 10%, police 6.5%, and fire 4.6%. So how we offset those increased personnel costs is various things that we've done for this budget and other budgets is eliminate positions, delay filling vacancies as they come up, especially in the general fund, and continued restructuring that has taken place for many years, and most recently in parks, fire, HR, and finance. Services, that blue pie at the bottom left is the next largest category at 26.3 million. Transfers and debt service, the other two biggest pies are 9% of expenditures, and those are about the same as last year. So revenues, $112,093,582. Charges for services being the largest piece of that pie, $25.7 million. It accounts for 23% of revenues. The majority of charges for services are in those utility funds that we talked about earlier. A large part of other, which is $26.2 million, is the internal service funds and fiduciary funds. We haven't talked about what fiduciary funds are. Fiduciary funds are our police and fire pension funds. Those assets are not available for use in providing services to residents. At any rate, property taxes are $19.5 million. That represents not only the proposed property tax levy, but also the tax increment that comes into each of our TIF funds. You will notice that revenue is less than expenses. The difference would be funded by current reserves. In addition, the difference is also a product of what we call modified cash budgeting or modified cash accounting. There are some things that we budget for that through the audit process are actually moved to the balance sheet. So we budget for principal payments and the water fund and other utility funds, and that's truly not an expense. It reduces the balance of the debt that's on the balance sheet. So we do move that. Same thing with depreciation. In a little different way, we budget for depreciation, but that's not cash going out the door. That's reflecting the use of those assets during that year. All right, general fund. General fund budget challenges. So it's a good time to move on to the general fund budget. The last few years, balancing the general fund has been a challenge, especially with relatively flat revenues. Costs do outpace our revenues. At the beginning of this budget season, when we issued guidelines to directors, the request was to maintain budgeted expenditures outside of those things they cannot control. So one of those being salaries, debt service, and the like. At the time of guidelines, we also knew what the actuarially determined police and fire pension costs would be. So that's provided to us through our actuary. That's kind of a given. The departments do struggle with this request, and concerns were raised about impacting service. The schedule does show that the state has imposed some budget challenges related to revenues that the city receives. Some changes have taken place over the last few years, and as I draw your attention to the last two columns, 2019 and 2020, we were recently impacted by the implementation of the P25 radio financing study. The good news is that we are funding this as we go, not borrowing for it, which is something that we actually did consider at one point when this project was coming through the pipeline. So the impact to 2019 ended up being $475,000, and in next year's budget is $425,000 that we're paying out of the general fund for the payments that are due in 2020. The other impact is that second from the bottom row, streets funding initiative, you see an X in the 2020 box. So we are setting aside $552,000 from the general fund specifically for streets. So that is derived from our local gas tax. So when we gas up here in town, 5 cents of every gallon comes to the city from the gas stations in town. Those funds will be transferred to a separate fund that is programmed for street work. So we're excited about that, but that was an impact to the general fund this year that we had to consider. So moving on with general fund budget challenges, I mentioned that one budget challenge is rising personnel costs, and so over 70% of overall operating costs relate to personnel expenses, and that is typical. We're not unusual when it comes to a government organization to have that statistic. The majority of our employees are subject to collective bargaining contracts with negotiated pay increases, and of course we do have healthcare costs that continue to increase at a rate that's higher than CPI. For 2020, the city's IMRF contribution rate increased by 10% from 8.99% to 9.89%. Police and fire pension costs, as shown here, will continue to increase. On the schedule, 2019 is $3.1 million higher than that first column. But we do have to keep in mind that police and fire benefits, pension benefits, are provided by the Illinois compiled statutes. And of course, we stand by our obligation to fund those pensions, but at the same time, it does impact our budget. So proposed budget solutions that we considered incorporated 4 areas. They include expenditure reductions, both cuts and delays, revenue increases, new revenues, and use of fund balance or reserves. Expenditure reductions included delay in filling positions and consideration for elimination depending on service impacts. Continued delay in vehicle purchases and reduced street maintenance, although changes have been planned in both of these areas to meet the needs of employee service delivery and infrastructure needs. And honestly, we're excited about both of those things that we have proposed. And then while the general fund departments did their best to reduce their budgets before finishing them in September, further cuts have been made since then. Revenue increases include ambulance fees, taxes related to cannabis, so just a partial year proposed, storage fees, and video gaming changes. We are seeing growth in our PPRT, and that's the corporate replacement tax, income tax, and use taxes, which is good. And we are proposing a property tax increase that we will be reviewing here. The final solution is use of reserves. The city's financial policies calls for 60 to 90 days of reserves, in which in recent years we have been able to maintain the upper end of that level. So one of the budget solutions each year is to reduce staff, as personnel costs are the largest part of our budget. 2020 proposed staffing represents a net reduction in staff of now over 7 FTEs. So when I was before you a month ago, we were right at that 7 number. But the clerk is up 6.65. HR went down 0.27. IT is not filling a 5th or a 6th position in their department. Martin Luther King is down. Fire is down. Public Works went down 3 positions in their staffing schedule. In both parks and library are also down 1, in large part due to the increase in minimum wage that they have to deal with. And now recently CED has elected to eliminate their paid intern, so they will no longer have that opportunity. So the general fund, let's talk about that. The total proposed general fund revenues for general fund for Fund 101 and the special revenue funds that make up the general fund. Just wanted to point that out. There's a little footnote on some of the other little funds that are added into the general fund when we're talking about certain numbers. But revenues are $38.3 million, which is up $2.6 million. Expenditures for the same funds are $38.5 million. Looking at the pie chart for the general fund expenditures of that $38.6 million, both the percentage for each department of the total general fund budget is shown, plus the total budget in rounded millions. So police constitutes the largest share at 41% and $15.7 million. Fire is at 27% of the general fund budget, or $10.6 million. And then with Public Works making up 15% of the budget, those 3 areas are 83% of the general fund. Looking at that same 38.6 a different way, personnel, again, largest portion, 29.1. So that's 75.5% of the general fund budget. The next largest category is services at 6.6 million and 17%.
Stephanie?
Yes. For sure.
Quick question for clarifying. I know the answer, but for those watching at home and in the audience, so if you go back 2 slides, you see police, fire, public works, finance, CED, IT, human resources, general administration. Absent is parks and rec. Can you explain why we're not having parks and rec included in this pie chart?
Sure. So here in the city of Rock Island, Parks and Rec is actually a separate fund in and all of itself. So it's not part of the general fund. So it is an enterprise fund. About 36% of their revenues do come from property taxes, and the other 2/3 are from other sources, mostly donations and fees that are charged to users. It's actually a unique model in municipalities. A lot of times, parks is part of the general fund. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify the use of enterprise funds. A lot of people may not understand Parks and Rec is in a separate fund from the general fund, which we are looking at here.
So breaking down general fund expenditures, the largest component, of course, is salaries at 16 million or 55%. Pension expense being the next largest portion, and again, that's IMRF, police, fire, FICA, and Medicare, and that's 29% of the total. So pension expense relates to 52 cents for every dollar paid to employees. Always kind of interesting to look at that number. The third largest component is health insurance at 2.8 million, and so those three portions make up 94%. So 94% of our personnel expenses are salaries, pension, and health insurance costs. So we will just touch on parks a little bit. So parks expenditures are $6.39 million, and the Parks Fund is made up of several departments, such as their golf courses, Whitewater Junction, and RIFAC. In addition to user fees, this fund also receives some support from property taxes. So their $5.5 million in revenues, property taxes make up 36%. Staff there have made great strides in reducing their expenses. They're about the most creative group of people I've ever seen. And of their 6.39 million of expenditures, personnel expenses make up 36% of their budget. Library is a governmental fund, so that is primarily supported by property taxes and limited user fees. So their proposed expenditures for 2020 total $2,778,400. Their revenues that are in the budget are $2.6 million. So of their $2.6 million revenues, the proposed property tax levy that we have for them would be 83% of their revenues. And then personnel expenses make up 65% of their budget. So property taxes are indeed an important revenue source for the city. And since we have referred to property taxes that are budgeted, we'll point out a couple things. So property tax revenue related to the levy is proposed at $13,728,435, and this is compared to $12.7 million last year's levy. So that is an increase of $981,000. So 52.6%, or the 7.2 million you see there on the right side of the pie chart, is related to police and fire pensions. So this table breaks down last year's levy and this year's proposed levy by component. The library and parks show an increase of 2%. Last year, these two funds also received a 2% increase, and the year before that, 1.83, so far below even what their personnel costs are increasing. I always have to note that the library board did request a 4.99% increase. Included in this table is the city's property valuation, which is part of the formula to calculate a taxing body's property tax rate. So this past August, the county notified us that the tentative valuation is $484,374,684, which is a 0.96% increase from the last certified valuation. And it is important to note that the final assessed valuation could be different from that number. Could be more, could be less, and it's gone both ways. Last year, it actually was higher than the tentative assessed valuation, which then makes the rate even a little bit lower than what we had filed. So actually, I just want to go back to the slide for a moment in this view. So the general fund increase is proposed to be 519,000. Police and fire pension, between the two of those, you can see, that it's close to 400,000. I think it's like 375, and then approximately $40,000 each to parks and to library. So you do see parks broken out into their three components: recreation, park, and RIFAC, but combined, that was just shy of $40,000. So dollar-wise, that is a 7.7% increase, with the property tax valuation going up 0.96%. That translates to an increase in the property tax rate of 6.67%. So this is a nice long history of the city's tax rate by year, all the way back to 1986. You can see there's a period in there from 2007 through, 2016, 2017, where the rate was very flat. And you'll see in a bar chart that I'll show you next how we managed to keep a flat rate, what the impact of that was on the city's budget. Also point out that the high point on this graph was the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, and there was a downward trend for some time, a little bit of a blip there in 2005 before we leveled off. The EAV history for the city is shown. The data points are the blue line with the little diamond shapes, and then the straight line is the trend line. So showing that there is a positive growth in our EAV, or in our valuation. So that is a good thing. That means our property values are increasing. There are some trends, where it's increasing at higher rates at times and then decreases. And it's certainly in recent years, that rate is increasing at a pretty low rate. It is under 1%, which is lower than our neighbors here in the Quad Cities area.
Stephanie, I have a question about EAV.
Yes.
In the history of the city, as far as our records that we could search, has the EAV ever been higher than it is now? This only goes back to 2003, so I'm wondering, in the history, have we ever had a higher EAV?
It is not likely,
Okay.
is my guess, but I could look and see if we have records in finance going back farther.
It would be interesting to know.
Mm-hmm. Gotta write myself a note or I will forget. So I referenced that there would be a bar chart that we would look at. So again, there's 6 portions of our property tax levy. The last column, the one to the far right, depicts the proposed 2019 levy of $13.7 million. Fire and police pension costs, again, are provided by the actuary. So that's kind of like where we start with the property tax levy. We get that from the actuary in the middle of summer and plug that in, and then we go from there. You can see from the bottom portion of the graph, that light green graph at the bottom, that the effect on the general fund was that we shrunk the portion that was going to the general fund for a number of years, almost to the point of 0. So in 2011, that first column, that number translates to $3.4 million. The 2019 proposed levy allocates $2.2 million to the general fund. It's harder to see on this graph, but in the 2011 through 2014 columns, both the library and parks levy was flat. So we actually gave them no increase for a number of years. So I know we've all had questions from residents about what a property tax increase, how that translates to their bills. And so one of the things we often have to start with is reminding them that the city is one portion of the total bill. So if your bill is $2,000, the city's portion is about $500. So any increase or decrease that we would be talking about would only translate to that $500 portion, not their whole tax bill. So there are, and why is that? There are other layers of governments. We call them overlapping tax districts. So in this case, it includes the county, that top row, the township, the school district, airport, college, and transit authority. Each taxing district establishes their own levy, and this table shows a 6-year history of the breakdown of a tax bill and shows that for the 2018 levy that was payable in 2019, so this year, the city of Rock Island's portion was 25%. So I'm adding that city and the city library together to come up with that 25%. In 2013, 6 years ago, that portion was 24%. So the largest portion of our tax bill is from the school district at about 50.6%. So as a guidepost, we often use a $100,000 home assessed at $100,000, and in addition, we take into account a homeowner's exemption, which is $6,000 deduction. And so with a tax rate of 2.8343, which is the proposed tax rate, the city's portion equals $775. So that's that third column of numbers. And it breaks down the portion that $775 goes to, with the largest portion being our fire and police pensions. This is compared to 2005 as well, which is when we had that little high point blip of 2.573. So this translates to an annual increase of about $48 and $4 per month. I know I have fielded some calls and walked through some property tax bills over the last month, and by and large, those that I talked to had a home that was less than $100,000, and the majority of them also had other exemptions in addition to the homeowner's exemption, so senior freeze or senior homestead, and the impact was, actually didn't have any that had the impact even as high as this, but I know it does impact some, and never want to minimize the impact to a household's budget, because I certainly understand that every dollar counts. So in conclusion, a mix of solutions were used to present balanced budgets: increased revenue, staff cuts, reduced spending, use of resources in order to continue and maintain a high level of service. Some of these actions are difficult, but through them, if supported, allows the city to maintain appropriate reserves. And so later tonight, there are some items related to the draft levy and the budget ordinance for your consideration. So with that, Mayor.
Start out with, is there any questions from the council? Questions on that?
Stephanie, were you able to get a spending per capita number? I know I emailed you a week or so ago about that, but I'm curious as to how many dollars the city of Rock Island spends per capita.
Yes, and so you had asked me that question, and part of my response was that you have to be careful in comparing it to other cities. And so you had said, is there a source for other communities? What do they spend? Every municipality has a different set of, number of employees, size, demographics, parks, all kinds of things. So I didn't get that number, but I'm going to provide it really quick. And so it's really just as simple as taking the 122 million and dividing it by our last census population, which is 39,018, I believe. So 122,046,571 divided by 39,018. So that would be per capita spending of $3,128. Other questions?
Other questions?
Oh, I don't have a question. I just have a statement. I mean, I appreciate everything that you've done, and I fielded a fair amount of angry phone calls, emails, you name it. I'm not in favor of the 6.67% tax increase, but what I've been trying to relay to people is with the cost of everything going up, we do have to raise taxes. You can't do a zero tax. I don't want to reduce people, services. You know, there's trying to find lots of ways to cut to preserve the services that we have. But I think you and the departments have done a wonderful job in trying to keep things running, you know, as best that we can without really having a huge impact on the residents. So I thank you for that.
Thank you.
I'll echo that comment, and then we're going to go into talking to the public, but there's no doubt that I think that both sides, or say both sides, but the city staff has done a very, very good job at trying to find expenses to cut. They've looked hard and deep, and they have for several years in a row. As we've seen in some of these charts, the number of employees that we've had and through attrition and everything else, and found some efficient ways, and so they've been working very hard at that. But I also want to comment that the city council has been continuing to challenge the city staff in trying to find areas to cut too. I think that, you know, so both, you know, I commend everybody up here to asking the questions, the hard questions, everything else, and challenging staff where and if things can be cut. And so I think we'll continue with that.
And I can't speak for the other council members, but we have had one-on-one conversations, clearly, to bounce ideas off. And I know that every time I've spoken to another council member, the concern has always been, how can we maintain the level of service as was mentioned by Stephanie? And you and the city manager have done a phenomenal job to try to find ways to make cuts that would, A, not hurt our personnel, not decrease the level of service that we provide to our citizens, and yet have the least negative impact financially. So it's a tough decision, and I know that this is going to be a hard decision for everybody.
Just to add to what the mayor said, Stephanie and I have received more questions in the past few weeks from aldermen than probably many years combined. So the aldermen have been looking in every nook and cranny and asking all the tough questions to the two of us and other departments. So it's really been a joint effort, but really the elected officials have really looked at every single avenue they can think of to get us to, you know, to try to look for cuts and again, reduce the impact on the citizens.
Once again, we're giving accolades and everything else, which is great and everything else, but I guess along with that, Stephanie, I know, has burnt some midnight oil over this budget. She's been here many, many nights till past midnight and even at home thinking about it. So kudos to Stephanie in trying to make it an understandable document, because that's not easy with a public entity. So with that, if we're ready, we're going to study session. There's been a little different. We're going to allow the public to be able to come up, ask questions about the taxes, and I guess anything else, but primarily we're looking for taxes. 2 people have signed up. If we have time, we'll continue to work on that. We will allow some dialogue, which is a little different, back and forth from the council and/or staff to those up there at the podium, which typically we do not. It's just a informational, or one-way dialogue. But in this case, we are going to allow some questions and answers to be able to happen the best we can and keep it within the right time limit, if that makes any sense. So one person, first one that signed up was Jim, and I can't read the last name. What's that? Uribe? Yes, sir. I just had a question, sir. Can you come up to the podium, please? Thank you.
I mean, sir, is this just for questions or presentation?
Anything you want.
Okay. Well, sir, I just have a question because I was going to make a presentation later, but on the enterprise fund, I've read about it. In fact, I've read the budget a couple of times, probably about 3 times, 311 pages. That's a big document. I guess the question I have on the enterprise fund, I understand it. It's similar to what we have in the federal government called non-appropriated funds. You bring in revenue and you try to offset costs and all that kind of stuff. But what I don't understand about it is, do those revenues generated by the enterprise fund cover salaries, pensions, those kind of costs, or is just operating costs?
Yeah, so it depends on what fund you're looking at, of course, but the typical ones that you talk about are the water fund, sewer fund, refuse fund, stormwater fund.
Well, sir, I
And
was
those all do cover everything that you mentioned.
Okay, because I was talking more like Sunset Marina, Highland Springs, Saukey, and the Business Activity Center. I know that, those are enterprise-funded activities, but do those, the money that's brought in, do they cover the legacy costs, like the pension costs, the health benefits, the retirement stuff? That I wasn't able to get out of the budget.
And they do, John or Stephanie could elaborate on that if you'd like, but. All of the enterprise funds, that's the goal of the enterprise fund, is that the money collected in the enterprise fund stays in the enterprise fund and is spent in the enterprise fund.
Okay.
So we don't take money, let's say, from sewer and water
Right.
and give it to police or fire or anything like that.
But like I said, I couldn't get from the budget whether they pay for the legacy costs, the health benefits, and the pension stuff.
John, is there anything else you want to add to that?
They cover all associated costs with staff that are associated with that facility. A good example would be Whitewater Junction,
Sure.
our water park.
Hey, John, you want to come up to the mic, because this is being televised?
They do cover their operational expense, which by itself is outside of the norm for park and recreation. Most communities subsidize these facilities anywhere from 60 to 70 to 80%, where the department is responsible for bringing in 30, 20% of its revenue. This is completely flipped, and in our enterprise funds, we do cover our costs. Is it that way every single year? No, but we have park reserves that we've built up, and since I've taken over as director, and Bill Nelson previously did a very good job, they have been covering their operational costs and associated staff with them.
Pensions and the IMR and health benefits also? I guess I would consider those legacy.
Well, what we do is associated, like our aquatics manager is a full-time position that would be dedicated to Whitewater Junction. Most definitely, that salary is covered by the operation of that facility.
And that person's pension also?
You would have to ask Stephanie, but yes. Yeah.
Yeah, when you see the personnel costs up there, that's everything, all of the personnel costs.
And by the way, the two golf courses in Rifac run in the black at this point.
Yes,
Those
sir.
are-
Yes,
So
sir.
people sometimes are saying, oh,
I wanted the opportunity to touch on this, especially in public, in front of everyone who wants to hear about this. This is something that Rock Island should be very proud of, very much proud of. I understand, let's look under every single rock we can to save money. We do the same thing year in and year out. I value our staff and our facilities and our services, and it's something that we do on an ongoing basis. We run a very business-minded business. We look at our enterprise funds as business, whether it's golf, Rifac, Whitewater Junction. We do get a little bit of tax dollars to operate Rifac. And there's two pieces to Rifac. There's the membership side, which is totally self-sufficient by the fees that they generate, and then there's the community side that a little bit of tax dollars go to. About $160,000 goes to that to help maintain the facility, the operations, because we put on community events there. It's not a membership. You don't need a membership to go on that side of the building, but there are services, some of them free, that go on that side of the building. So that's how that is justified and budgeted.
And I do understand the fact that the $2 million that the parks don't generate are needed to maintain it, so I do understand it. But I guess my comments are, since I'm up here already.
sure.
In 2019, the city council approved increases of 9.56%, which included the 2.9% increase in property taxes, a 5% increase in waste and stormwater rates, a wage increase of 1.66%, and increase the gas tax to 5 cents per gallon. This year, you're considering 12.6% increases in property taxes and fees, which includes a 6.6% property tax increase and a 6% increase in wastewater and storm rates. This adds up to a total increase of 22.23% in 2 years. I guess a bunch of people that I've told, we're going to submit the following, spending reductions for your consideration. First one is review all city operation and functions and implement Lean Six Sigma management principles to eliminate non-value added work functions in partnership with our city unions. We did this with the federal government, and the only way Lean Six Sigma is successful is by including our union partners in this effort. The second thing is we would ask is that you review city wages and benefits. There are 40 city employees making over $100,000 per year in salary and benefits according to PA 0970606 compliance report, which was posted on our city's website. This seems excessive when you consider that the median household income in Rock Island is $43,558 according to the city's website. So again, just a review. Next one is use cannabis revenue to reduce property taxes. I mean, we might as well get something out of something being high. Maybe we can use that to reduce property taxes. And then, according to published minutes from the city council meeting dated 25 November, Alderwoman Swanson stated that there are several council members who do not want a 6.6% tax increase. The citizens of Rock Island do not want this increase or the 6% increase in waste and stormwater rates. We recommend that this council implement our spending reductions to avoid future increases. Our citizens cannot afford a 22.3% increase in property taxes and fees. Many people in our city, which I've talked to a lot of them, have lost faith in our elected officials' ability to reduce spending. Restore their faith by voting against these tax increases and taking bold and decisive action to reduce spending. Folks, I think we're at the point now, and I'm sorry to say this, but there is no way to stop the exodus of people, money from Rock Island County, unless we reduce the tax burden on our taxpayers. So thank you very much, sir. Thank you, and Merry Christmas.
Thank you. We can either comment on some of those if you want, or
What was our proposed water and sewer increase?
3% each.
3% each?
3% each,
Thanks,
Randy?
3%.
Yeah, so it's not really accurate to add those together, because they all sort of go hand in hand, and so it isn't as if you're paying 22% more than you paid last year. I mean, you can't,
Okay.
you can't just add the separate increases up, so, just to throw that out. So it means for water, you're paying 3% more, and your property tax, maybe you pay 6% more, and.
But I mean,
stormwater-
as far as total increases, and I understand, I mean, it's not easy to run a city. I mean, it wasn't easy to run my departments when I worked for the federal government, but, you know, again, talking to people out there, and I've talked to a lot of them, probably over 100 since September the 3rd, people are hurting. A lot of people have informed me that, you know, they're at the tipping point, and these are people who aren't receiving any kind of government assistance. These are working people, you know, that making 20, 25 bucks an hour, trying to raise their family. And I think we're at the point where unless we reduce spending, I mean, I think we're going to continue to see an exodus of people and money.
Right. And let me make comments, and these comments are not, I don't want to sound defensive, it's more information.
Yes, sir.
On the comments back on a couple of these. We did implement and approved up here a 3% sales tax for cannabis.
Okay.
And that only benefits Rock Island if and when there is a dispensary in the city of Rock Island. So don't know if there will be or not. If there is, it won't be until at earliest to be June or July of next year, of 2020. I think now it was, they couldn't collect taxes until September, started until September, but I think they changed that. But either way, at best, you're going to see 6 months of it, if there is one.
Sure.
So that's all an if, on that, an answer to that. Water and sewer, yes, they're going up. Let me just make a comment on both of those, and it's just an FYI on two of them. Over the last, and I probably get the years wrong, but we'll call it the last 10 years, the city of Rock Island has spent over $70 million in the sewage part of it, in updating and expanding that plant, based on a federal lawsuit that we were in. It was mandated to make these changes. And so, obviously, we need to recuperate some of those costs. Now, there were some grants, some low-interest loans, and a lot of bonding and different avenues long before this board was even thinking about being up here. But there were some expenses, and there's still some ongoing. It was not rebuilt and brand new, to make sure that we stay in compliance and are putting water back into the Mississippi, or putting the water in cleaner than it came out, so to speak. So that obviously is a major expense and an obligation that we have to have. Then with the water filtration plant, our plant was 109 years old. You couldn't get parts for a lot of the stuff anymore. Some of it's repetitive to people, and that's why I apologize. But and we're having to custom order parts or make parts and Band-Aid things together. So We are just on the final stages within the next 30, 60 days of going online with a $20 million water filtration plant. Obviously, you spend $20 million, you've got to make sure you pay that back and everything else. There'll be some efficiencies there. We don't know exactly what those efficiencies are going to be, if it's less personnel, if it's just more cleaner water. What exactly, we're not sure. And so we'll have to see exactly when we go down the road where and what happens with that. But we owe it to the citizens to be able to make sure that we're up to date, giving them the best quality drinking water.
Yes, sir.
That we can. So that $20 million, it needed to be spent. It had been, some has been spent for maintenance over the 109 years, but a major deal had not.
Sure.
So we had to bite the bullet on that. Once again, even that, I got to say that, and not taking blame on, or putting blame on the previous council or anything else, that was done before this council was up here, those commitments, but I think we would have probably done the same thing. It had some issues.
And sir, I agree with that. I mean, at this point in time, forget about blaming what happened in the
Yes,
past.
exactly.
I mean, we're in the future.
That's right. So we had to spend the 20 million.
But I am confident, I really am, because I've seen it work within DOD, Department of Defense. If you folks decide to implement Lean Six Sigma, there's no doubt in my mind that you could come up with at least 30% cost savings, perhaps in personnel. And again, it's got to be done in partnership with our union folks. And, you know, we handled that kind of savings through attritions. We didn't hurt any employee, early outs, attrition, and all that kind of stuff. So Lean Six Sigma is really the way to go if your company's in financial trouble or if a city's in financial trouble.
Absolutely. No, we'll definitely take a look at that.
Yes, sir.
And can't commit we'll do anything, but we'll definitely take a look at it. Now, unfortunately, we're so far enough down the road that for the 2020, we have to do all these public hearings and everything else and get that all registered with the state and everything else. Sure. So we will not be able to look at that and implement anything for the fiscal year of 2020.
But if you look at it and you realize the savings,
yes.
I won't have to be here next year.
There you go. No,
Yes,
I
sir.
like it. That's great. By the way, the water and sewer fees that we have in Rock Island, and even in the Illinois Quad Cities, are cheaper than they are in the Iowa Quad Cities. So we are still watching those rates and
we
making
appreciate
sure
that.
that we aren't sitting there just escalating higher than anybody else. Still can make them try to be as efficient we can and keep them low, but they are on the lower side of what you find in the Quad Cities. Another comment I have, and I apologize for dominating here, ladies and gentlemen, but is that you talk about the wages, and some people's are over $100,000.
Yes, sir.
And you can compare it, there's a lot of different ways to compare and work
sir.
with salaries. One is obviously what is the average income in the city of Rock Island.
Sure.
But really more realistic is if you were to replace somebody, what would you spend to replace them and for what expertise they bring to the table?
Yes, sir.
And whether it's with the city manager, whether it's public works, whatever role it is, you have to do it, and the city does do wage reviews. I don't know, every 3 years or whatever it is, but 5 years, I can't remember. It's immature. They do take a look at it and see what does it take to replace an individual with the right qualifications. And so you got to stay within what the market is. Most
Yes,
of you
sir.
that
I
have businesses
understand.
and everything else.
I understand that.
You got to, and if the market is 150,000, 200,000, whatever the market is, and we do pay grades, we pay
sir.
ranges.
Yes, sir.
In the city of Rock Island. And when they do hit that top end of the pay range, their wages are frozen.
Yes, sir.
And they do get a cost of living, part of it, but, so to try to maintain it, it's not like it gets carried away.
And I
in a
spent
lot of
3 years
areas.
in position management with the federal government, and I understand exactly what you're
That's
going
exactly
through.
how, you got to look what the market is.
Yes, sir.
And so, in
But
a
I think,
sense, you
it-
do,
know,
you get
and I
what you
just
pay
had
for.
review because the disparity seems, out of whack.
Compared to the wages in Rock Island,
Yes,
yes.
sir. Yes, sir.
But not compared to the positions in the same, like cities. If you go to Peoria or other like cities that we're compared against, there's about 7 of them that a lot of times we're compared against. We're in the ballpark, if not on the lower side. And I will use, it's public knowledge, I'll use these city managers as a role, is that Randy actually stepped into this position at a substantially reduced wages from the previous city manager. And so there was substantial reduction in that position 2.5 years, 3 years ago, whatever it was. I lose track of time, unfortunately. But there was a substantial drop in wages there compared to the previous. And before that one, I couldn't tell you. I'm not knowledgeable on that. But so we are continuing to look at those.
Sure, appreciate that.
And to make sure it's realistic.
Yeah, and again, we all have a vested interest in the city of Rock Island.
Absolutely.
We want to retire here if we can, and
Yep.
that's our that's our vested interest in why we do this.
So I just want to make sound these are argumentative, because they're not. We
Fine,
want
sir.
to, I just want to explain what's behind them,
A good exchange.
okay? Yes.
Just a comment, not necessarily for, only for Mr. Uribe, but for everyone. The council is doing everything they can. We hear you, and we're trying to chart a course to lower expenses and to lower taxes. And I think our record since 2017, when Alderman Geenan and Parker and myself were elected, is that we're doing what we have to do to keep the city running. But the trend is downward expenses, downward taxes. Unfortunately, revenues are not what they should be, but that's part of the struggle. And I don't know what the outcome of the discussion will be tonight, but I think we'll have maybe a spirited discussion on what level we're comfortable with as far as taxation goes this year. But I'm hoping that it's lower than last year, and I hope next year is lower than this year. So we're on that trend, and I just want people to know that.
Thank you.
I will say that, that I've had discussions with Mr. Uribe as well. And I thank you for your confidence, because the last comment that he has always made to me is, I know you guys are doing the best that you can, and just understand that we have faith in you. So if it's doable, we'd like you to do it. If it's not doable, then I guess we'll, as long as you give it your best shot, then we'll back you.
That's all we can ask for.
And for that, I thank you.
Yes.
Thank
And
you,
keep the ideas coming.
Yep, okay.
We want
Yes,
the
sir.
public to keep on throwing ideas and thoughts at us, please.
sir.
We want to hear from you guys and any of the public listening. We do really, truly want to listen.
Mm-hmm.
We'll research whatever is feasible to research. You never know where a good idea is going to come from. So
I'll send
thank you.
Mr. Tweed a book on Lean Six Sigma for service industries, and I think that would kind of shed some light on what that's all about.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. Bill. Okay, your time's up, Bill. Oh.
Wait a minute, that's the seventh word, let him speak.
Bill Long. Yeah.
Bill Long. First, I'd like to address Jenny. Your statement was, prices are going up, so we have to raise taxes somewhat, and you're not for this increase. Our prices are going up, and we're on a fixed income. What do we do? Got a solution for that?
Well, I've spent considerable time going through the budget. I've spent considerable time talking with the city manager, always bringing a long list of places where I think we can cut. I mean, I've even floated the idea of, does our trash need to be picked up every week? Maybe you go every other week. I mean, I understand the fixed income, and we're trying to find things without, we don't want to cut services to anybody. We don't want to cut personnel. As people retire, looking at their jobs, do they have to be replaced? Can it be maybe a part-time person? I mean, just looking at all the options. But I do know things go up. I mean, cell phone bills go up, cable bills go up. I mean,
But not, fixed incomes don't go up.
no, fixed incomes do
So
not
where
go
do
up.
we get the additional money to pay the increase in costs that you guys encounter?
And I don't have an answer for that.
Okay, that's why I wanted to make sure you knew it existed. And as far as the personnel goes and the 120,000 incomes or whatever it is, you say how we get quality people. Maybe we can't afford quality people. Maybe we got to take B-grade people and do the best we can with them instead of paying them high wages to get the best there is in the world. So it's something else you got to consider. I worked with a John Deere for all my working life, or most of my working life, and I had budgets just like you guys, and it's a tough, tough job. I believe it 100%. But every year, John Deere would come to my department, give me the budget time. You know what they do? They didn't say, what do you want? They said, here's your money. Mine was a long time ago. I had 60 people. My budget happened to be $3.8 million. Spend it. Here's what we want you to get. Out of this $3.8 million, tell us where you're going to spend it. And if you can't get it done, we'll get somebody that can. And I want you folks to keep that in mind too. If you can't get it done on the money that we can give to you, then we may have to look for people that can get it done for us in that time. It's desperate times need desperate measures. And folks, we are in desperate times. We are in desperate times. I don't know if anybody read in the paper recently about Nissan Motors. You see what they're doing? They're in desperate times. What are they doing to cut down their expenses? Anybody remember or know? First week in January, every employee of Nissan's taking 2 days off without pay. If they want to keep their job, that's what they'll do. Maybe we have to do something like that. Maybe we have to suffer for 2 days without pay. Realize you got the unions to abide by and everything, but we got to do some desperate measures to when we're in desperate times to make anything work. And we are in desperate times. Taxation, I hate to quote anybody, but I can quote somebody that's known to somebody, Jenny knows, is she don't worry about sales tax. My wife doesn't worry about sales tax. Anybody guess why? She says there's no place in Rock Island to spend money anyhow. Can't go out and buy a suit. Can't buy a car. What the heck difference does it make to us if you put a 20% sales tax on what's sold in Rock Island? Because you're going to go over to Davenport and spend it or other areas. She uses the internet at 8.64%. So sales tax is no big problem to her. It is to me and a lot of others because we got no place to pay. But property tax, we worry about that. And I know we just went through it with Stephanie. Good job, Stephanie. I don't know if anybody here can tell me right off the top of their head, how many entities is there in your property tax bill?
I don't know.
Anybody know?
How many what?
Entities.
Entities.
My taxing entities. Taxing bodies.
Yeah. Can they tell me?
Does the library count?
Yeah.
About 8.
You're right, Jim. There's 8. Been 8 for quite a while. Did you know if everybody puts 10% increase, that's an 80% increase? If they put a 1% increase, it's an 8% increase? Everybody's coming in the same bill to get my money. And Uncle Sam and my employer, they're not giving me any more money. What am I supposed to do? I got to give up some of my standard of living. And that's what you folks ought to have to do. That's what we have to do in the city of Rock Island, because it's no secret the population that Stephanie just used to get $3,128 per capita. It ain't that now, because it's more than that. It's higher than that. We got less people. And the taxes, according to her, they keep coming in. And on your charts you had up there, I never seen one item, one entity that was reduced. Everything was plus, except one was a 0. Do you ever plan on saving money? Plan ahead, do something. Again, desperate times mean desperate measures, and I think we as a city, me as a citizen, is in the point where I have to take desperate measures in my lifestyle. I think the city should take desperate measures. I think the whole population of the city may have to go with a day late on the garbage, may have to have one less patrol car come by or something. But somewhere along the line, you got to spend less money because you're not getting more forever and ever and ever. Look at the county went up. Now the county's going to propose Tuesday night a 1% safety tax. Safety tax. Our county. I asked them, what do you mean safety tax? 83% of everything we do is in line of safety for our citizens. Hogwash. It's just another way to put it on safety or on kids to make you feel bad. Put that price up there. I can almost guarantee you'll see a lot of people bow their necks when it comes March when that referendum gets for the county. And if you get a referendum of any kind, it's going to have the same problem. One more quick thing. If I want to put a referendum on the ballot saying, I want to do anything, what do I have to do? Does anybody know? Anybody ever do it?
Referee, you get petition and.
You got it, petitions. I stood out in the snow and got petitions for 10 years ago to reduce the county board. How many's there today? Same as there was then. Didn't do us much good. But the point is, if the county wants to put a referendum on, or the city, they don't need to do anything but do it and be first in line because you can only be 3 on the ballot. Well, that's hogwash. I think you guys, if you want a tax increase, it should be on the ballot in a referendum, and I think you should have to get 500 signatures of citizens saying, yes, this is a good idea, let's put it on there, the same as I would have to. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate it.
Bill, I just want to say, Bill, can you hear me?
Sir, I always hear you.
Okay. You made some good points. I don't agree with all of them, but I agree with some of them. And I want you to know that I'm on a retired budget myself. My wife and I are both retired and on a fixed income, and I understand what you mean.
Very good, thank you, Jim.
Once again, I'm going to talk about a few of those comments and everything else I'll continue to put them in content also. And boy, somebody could fact check me, but I did a study where talked to rural home insurance, home sales and everything else. And the average price for selling a home has gone up in Rock Island the last couple of years in a row. So that's been a very positive move. Also, believe it or not, there was, and boy, Sarah's back there. She could maybe quote this. It was in her newspaper, I believe, but I guess it's the only newspaper. And I didn't mean that as a slam, but is that there's actually more people from Iowa moving to Illinois. Now, I'm not saying Davenport to Rock Island. I'm saying Iowa as a state to Illinois than the other way around. You do hear the rhetoric of, I'm moving to Iowa, I'm moving to Iowa. And in the last 2 years, that's not been the case. There's been more move to Illinois than Iowa. And so there, once again, to continue to put things in content, the average day that this house has been on the market is less today than it used to be and is less than most other parts of the Quad Cities. And so they're selling faster in Rock Island. So you can continue to look at those statistics. And the other is Bill, you're right. There aren't many places to buy some of you're right, a suit or a car and some of those things. But let's just take gas, for example, and there are some other retail, there's hardware stores, et cetera. Let's keep working on spending the money here in Rock Island because the property the sales tax comes to Rock Island. It comes to the Rock Island school systems. And so we've heard this, I don't know how many times, and I'm going to keep preaching it, as Jenny, I know you have. So maybe I'm still on your thunder, but encouraging people to spend money in Rock Island or in the Illinois Quad Cities because it helps the school system and helps the city. So don't just, for 5 cents a gallon, I know we're all fixed incomes, but it's going to come out of our pocket one way or the other. Let's spend it in sales tax in the Quad City, in Illinois, in Rock Island. So I continue to, also real quick, a rebuttal, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to continue to take, but you talk about people taking days off and using it as an example. I know it's not a total idea, but an example. There are other ramifications to that. We have to give up some services then because otherwise you drive up overtime, which then costs more money. And so then you have to give up, once again, a stormwater or a water line getting delayed, getting fixed out in the street, or you delay garbage being picked up by a day or whatever it is. And we've worked very hard at not affecting services. And Bill, I think you're correct, that we are getting down to the point that we start making cuts, drastic type deal. It could end up affecting services. And that's what, and it very well may have to, and that's correct. But that's where we've been.
Something, we can't have the Cadillac.
Right.
We gotta have the Buick, maybe a
Yep.
Ford, or the, whatever
Yeah.
the price cars are now, they don't fly anymore.
As long as it's American made. But, that's right, but I just want to, the number one goal for the council has been not to affect services, because we are paying a lot in taxes, and so people sit there and make comments, I'm paying a lot, I should get a lot. And so when you start cutting services and then you're still paying a lot, that even hurts worse in a lot of people. So that's not an easy philosophical move to make, but it may be one need. I apologize. Any other comments by this? We'll open up still. Is there anybody else out there that would like to speak? I know they haven't signed up. Does anybody else like to speak? on the taxes. Anything else from the council? Otherwise, we're gonna,
Well, so I'd like some discussion on this from the council here. We're in an open session, and it's your chance to talk amongst yourselves with all of you here and discuss what you want to see tonight when we get to that portion of the agenda.
I'd like to start off with a comment. Excuse me. We got an email from the city manager regarding some options that Stephanie laid out for us. And there was a range of tax rates from the 6.67, which was originally proposed, all the way down to 3.93. And in the middle was 5.74% tax rate. So my thought was that there's, we have to make a responsible decision, first of all, to keep the city running on the level that we want it to run. We also have to keep the taxpayers in mind, which, by the way, we all are also. My thought was there's a lot of room in between the low of 3.93 and the middle of 5.74. I don't know why there wasn't anything in between there, and if either Stephanie or Randy wants to comment on that, that's fine. But I would be interested in reducing the proposal from 6.67 to something below 5% in order to support that. And I'd welcome anybody's feedback.
Well, just quickly, why those three were in there, the 3.9% or so was what we originally presented to you in October, when we met in our 2-on-2 meetings. The 6.7 was sort of what we came out of those meetings with, and the 5.7 is that rate minus the changes that were identified over the last few weeks and added into the budget. And you could have 15 options between there, and we didn't want to overwhelm the council, so we gave you those three options, two which have been discussed, and then the new one taking into account the changes we've identified.
I would like to make a comment on that, regarding that. This wasn't brought up earlier as we were speaking about this, but I would like to outline the fact that city departments have cut $120,000, and this has been in the last week or so. They've dug deep, and we've asked them to go back and look at all the different ways they can cut and still make their departments functional. And, just by that initial $120,000, reduce that proposed decrease by approximately a percentage point. So just to let everyone know, this city council has put in a lot of hours, a lot of time, a lot of discussions with department heads, and a lot of discussions with our finance director, who's really probably tired of hearing from all of us at this point, this week anyway. But that $120,000 was the work of the departments, and they put in some time and trimmed some areas, or we'll call it trim the fat, like everyone likes to use that term. So just with that in mind, we are still working, and that is so in the last week, we have made some cuts. So people think that we just throw out these numbers arbitrarily, and that's not the case. There has been some work done, and we will be continuing to find other ways to reduce our costs. So, and not to call Bill or Jim out, but we do hear you, and just to let you know, we are trying to make the right choices, so.
So my initial reaction in October was the 3.93, and in all honesty, I still thought that was kind of high and was kind of shocked at the 6.67. I do understand wages go up, the pensions go up, all that personnel stuff goes up. We did elect to pull $500,000 out of the general fund to put it back into roads, because that was the one thing that I heard over and over and over from everybody was the roads. Had been no money budgeted for roads, so we went ahead and fixed that. But by moving that money out, kind of left a hole in the general fund that had to be filled. One of the things that I sat for about an hour with the city manager this morning was looking over capital improvement projects for 2020, and I had a whole list. Do we have to do this? Do we have to do this? Can't this wait? I mean, you know, I realize that the cannabis tax is gonna be a revenue generator for us, not millions of dollars, but it's going to bring some in. I don't want to be accused of kicking the can down the road, because that's not what I want to do, but on some of the projects, it's like, do they have to happen this year? Can they hold off another year? And I don't want to keep holding things off, but, you know, on some of the items, do we really need to do them next year? Can we just wait to see if the cannabis revenues are coming in the way we hope that they do? If, you know, we're getting more economic development downtown like we hope that we're gonna get, and those revenues increase, you know, then we can go ahead and repair the roofs on the shelters. You know, that's kind of a, you know, if you don't repair the roofs on the shelters and they leak, nobody will rent them out, so it cuts into your revenues. So it's that balancing act of what has to be done and what can wait. And I'm a taxpayer too, and I'm incredibly cheap. And it's like, if I can put it off with a little bit of duct tape and glue for a year, I will go ahead and do that, knowing that at some point it does have to be fixed and done. But to my fellow council members, I am not voting for a 6.67% increase, and I don't even think I'm gonna go for the 5% one. I am a firm believer in wants and needs, and you have your needs that you have to make the city run. You also have wants, and wants are great. I have wants, but sometimes those wants maybe have to be delayed for a year or two until you have, you know, money to go ahead and make them happen. Or until, unfortunately, a want becomes a need, and then you have to fix it.
For an example, the fire engine we had to buy because the frame rusted and broke. And so we continued to push that one down the road, and finally, no choice, and make an emergency purchase.
It would no longer go down the road.
Yeah, it's exactly, it no longer would go down the road. That's exactly, and that's the problem with, quote, kicking that can down. And we've got some other city vehicles that are rusted pretty well, if that's proper English, but are rusted and are getting to the point of not being safe on the road, some large snowplows and dump trucks and that sort of thing. And so we've got to be careful on how far we push these down the road, because then we're gonna spend the money no matter what. It's just an emergency deal in the middle of the year, and we take it out of reserves. And once again, as I bring up that word, is that I'm a proponent and get nervous about pulling money out of reserves. We need, you know, the bond ratings, look at those sort of things. And how you do it, you save them for a rainy day. Is today a rainy day? It may be, but is it misty or raining? Because eventually we don't know what the future holds. And if we deplete that pot too low, we could have a problem, a bigger problem than what we think we have now. So I think we need to be very cautious in pulling out reserves, especially if you drop below the 60-day reserves. We tried to talk about 60 to 90. We start fudging lower already off the 90. Now we end up in the 80s or 70%, and you know, it's easy to slip down that road. And so I have great concern about just lowering the percentage of increase by pulling it out of reserves, because I think we're fooling ourselves by doing that. You can do that a little bit because you maybe, you know, for delaying something, but we need to be careful on how often and how large we pull out of reserves. But so it is a delicate. I don't like it either. I do not like tax increases. Don't want it. But I haven't found a way yet to cut, without cutting services, to cut enough to make it worthwhile. Once again, I keep talking up here, but that $500,000, which I agree that I like the gas tax that we put on there to go to streets, that's been a problem. But we could delay that problem. We could kick that one down the road also. Once again, we heard it. But it's, you know, once again, what is taboo and what is not? We could take and not fix roads that we have planned on for 2020 and take that $500,000 and put it back into the general fund and lower the property tax. That is a possibility. But we've got to remember that come next spring, after everything thaws, and we got potholes and we got roads falling apart, and citizens are calling and complaining.
And people are looking to buy houses in Rock Island.
Right, buy houses, and they say, well, those potholes and everything else, the streets look like crap and everything else, that's where the money went. So we didn't do the property tax increase. And so it's always, you know, it's easy to say cut here, but not there. You know, don't cut mine, cut somebody else's. got my soapbox. I don't know if there's anybody else, and we need some indication of where people are willing to.
Can I get Stephanie just to come up for a second and talk about reserves for a little bit? Because it was outlined in that email I sent out, and maybe she could cover it here, just so you understand what it means in the different options and where we would be.
Okay, so as the general fund, as the general fund sits right now, the budget is a deficit budget for the general fund of about $300,000 with that proposed increase. So, as Randy mentioned, we outlined some options and tried to highlight what an impact would be. So, again, last week, adjustments were made to the budget, decreasing another $120,000. So, I showed you earlier with the property tax levy that the general fund portion was about 519,000. We'll just call it 520,000. So if we were to reduce that general fund portion of 400,000, that would increase the deficit from that 301,000 to 421,000. And so that equals about 4 days of reserves. So 421,000 equals about 4 days of general fund reserves. So if we divide our 38,000 by 365, that's about 105,000 a day. We did actually pass a 2019 budget with use of general fund reserves to the tune of 770,000, about 7 days of reserves. And I think it was about 2 or 3 meetings ago, we did the third quarter report, and I highlighted some of the expenses that have been unexpected, but revenues were coming in pretty good, and they actually exceeded those unexpected expenses to the tune of about 600,000. So, backtracking just a little bit, we talk about what our budget might be for next year, and we're looking at possibly using reserves. We also have to look at where are we now. So when we did the audit update to council, the auditor indicated that we were, just shy of that 90-day reserves, not by much. But in the 19 budget, we had planned deficit, but it looks like we'll be doing better than we thought, not quite break even. So I predict that we'll be in the mid to high 80s for general fund reserves. So back to where we're talking right now, possibly a $300,000 deficit if the council were to approve the 6.67% rate increase. That would be $300,000, about 3 days. We could reduce that general fund portion by $120,000, utilizing 4 days of reserves. A third option, that was provided was bringing the tax rate down to 3.93%, and that's actually where we started with the base budget for the levy when we came to council and said, okay, this is where we're at, we're still working on it, and then we lay out all these options for things that we could change, and so one of the options was to change the property tax levy. So with that 3.93% increase in the rate, that would bring us to a budget that kind of looks like this year's budget. So the deficit would be 734,000. So about the use of 7 days reserves. So I hope that answers your question,
I have a couple
Randy, as we talk
questions.
about the use of reserves.
Yeah, I want to ask a quick
Well, so that,
question.
excuse me, just to clarify, that it would put us down around 80 days or so potentially next year, assuming everything came in as planned. And again, it might come in better, but it isn't like we're pushing that 60-day limit or anything, even with taking those 7 days.
So before we ask more questions or deliberate at all, I'm interested to know what the tax rate would be if we decided, I'm sorry, just a second here, not what the tax rate would be, what the general fund deficit would be, or the number of days of our reserve if we decided to have a tax rate of just under 5%. I mean, whether it was 4.99 or 4.45 or whatever would be easy to calculate.
And I could have that ready when we come before you in a little bit in the regular agenda, unless Randy can pull it up.
Well, each percent is 105 or so, 100, a little more, 120, I think. So you're probably looking at 5.5 days of reserves there. Maybe would that be a good
Sounds about right.
estimate? Just an estimate.
Five-
I mean, it would be between the 4 days and the 7 days, so
Right.
I'm splitting the difference at 5.5. Stephanie would have to do the actual math on that, but that's, for discussion, that's pretty good.
And that was for just under 5%.
Yeah, I'd say we did a 5.9, so you're going from, or 4.9, so you go from, 5.7 and 3.9, what's in the middle,
Okay.
approximate.
I had some questions about the use of reserves. So what is the city's reserves, as we're referring to them as? Where are they held? Is it cash in a checking account? Is it investments? What type of money is the reserves?
So it's a mix of investments, our liquid cash here at American Bank. We also utilize Illinois funds, which is a cash pool that's shared by several municipalities across the state, actually ran by nature of state statute. We also use IMET, Illinois Municipal, another cash pool that's operated here in the state. We also have a series of CDs, bank CDs that we purchase 1 and 2 year maturities, and then we also have a portfolio of U.S. agencies and treasuries.
Okay, so I'm not that knowledgeable about financial world as much as you are, so that's why I asked these questions. I would echo the mayor's comment and say that I'm very nervous about continuing to rely on reserves for this city. We've already done that this past budget, 7 days worth of reserves, if I understand it correctly. What happened in 2009, 2010 for Illinois municipalities? I mean, what would happen if in 3 years we have another national recession? What sort of impact would that have on our financial health for the city if we were to continue to lower our cash flow?
Well,
It's a big
certain-
question, sorry.
Yeah, no. If we were to go through another 2009, 2010, really the biggest impact would be the pensions. That is where, at least a third of our contribution is intended to be made up with interest and appreciation and investments. And so that trickles through to the general fund. That would be the biggest impact for sure. The other biggest impact would be in assuming it affected real estate values, which honestly, that didn't really impact the Quad Cities like it did a lot of other areas of the United States. So
We still
you know,
saw a dip on that EAV chart in 2010, so,
you see a blip, but not the same.
right.
Not the same impact, that I experienced in the Chicago suburbs, which they still have, especially, some areas of Chicago still have yet to recover from that. So that would be a challenge then, that would exacerbate the challenge because then we do fund our police and fire pensions through that property tax. I could see that being a challenge for our parks and libraries, in particular, if we were to try to hold a tax rate even, we wouldn't be able to keep up. It would be very difficult. It kind of makes me start sweating as you say that, but okay.
Yeah, well, and I guess my point, and I want to commend all of my colleagues up here, especially the new ones. I've only been up here for 2.5, 3 years, not a very long time. I haven't gone through this many times, but I don't think I've served with a bunch that have so thoroughly questioned staff and combed through every line item of the budget, and so you are to be commended for doing that. It's our responsibility being up here. I would like us to think of the long-term effects of our decisions. Obviously, nobody wants to raise taxes, right? We've established that many times tonight. I'm very nervous about utilizing municipal reserves to not even balance our budget, but to have it be a deficit budget. Well, I guess that's the same thing. But anyway, you know what I'm trying to say. I guess my position is if we can agree to cuts that would bring it to 4.99 or 3.93 or whatever number we want to pick, then I'm all for that. I think that that's great. We should do that. I have a number of proposals that I'll get to here in a moment. But to simply say, well, I want 4.99 and we can get to it by utilizing more and more of the city's reserves, I'm not sure that that is, you know, my kids and grandkids, what are they gonna do when they live here in the city of Rock Island? So I would just ask that we consider that. A few proposals, because I would like to get us below the 6.67 number. Street funding, this was, I think, originally my proposal, right? And I want to see it at 520,000 or whatever Randy just said. If we are not comfortable with the 6.67% level, could we phase in moving to $500,000 in the street fund? Could we do 250,000 this year and then increase it to 500,000 next year? It's still, at the end of the day, the same amount of money, and we will ultimately raise taxes or find cuts the same amount, but it will be over 2 years. I don't know if people, in my personal opinion, it's best to just do what you want to get done and not extend it. But if people would rather do something like that, I could support that.
Would you repeat those numbers, Dylan?
I just threw out having it for this year. So instead of putting $500,000 from the general fund into streets, do 250 or something. I don't know, just whatever this group would be comfortable doing. And I'm sorry, Stephanie, I know that we've passed policies and we've created a separate fund, and I'm sure that this is a nightmare for me, the one that proposed this, to come back and say, hey, let's not do this all the way, but I'm for doing 500,000. And I would be fine with passing a 6.67% increase in the property tax rate. But I understand that that is not necessarily the most popular thing, and so we can maybe find some working space there. Another thing that I would like us to keep in mind is, what are we looking at doing next year? I believe the last time when we talked about this during the other business section of the last city council meeting, I had talked about, and we had talked about, I don't want to take credit, but do we do a 6.67% increase this year and then direct staff? Absolutely, all of us up here will do 0% next year, right? Something like that. While I don't like the idea of arbitrarily ahead of time saying, we're not going to do a tax increase because we don't know what the expenses will be, are we just prolonging, like I said earlier with the road fund, are we just prolonging having to raise taxes again next year by not taking care of our expenses this year? It's a thing to think of. The hydroelectric plant, I know we're getting into the weeds here, where this has been brought up by a number of aldermen to me. If we can, I don't know what the cost is going to be for mothballing it for now. Obviously, we're not going to be able to sell it in a month. But if we can, I don't know if that was included in the 120,000 or whatever.
So that is a separate fund, and we aren't really putting any money into that right now.
Okay.
So
Okay.
we're essentially have done that, you know, we've got to pay items out of there like the debt service, but there'll be a study session coming to you to talk about what you want to do with the hydro plant. But again, it's a different fund, it doesn't affect the general fund, it doesn't affect property taxes. And there'll be no major expenses there until we come to council anyway. It's just right now a line item in the budget that is just a
Okay.
line item.
I had a number of people ask me about it, and I thought it was worth saying that I would be supportive of that.
Yeah, I'm still investigating and trying to grasp how this all fits together with the hydroelectric plant, because there's a lot of things the numbers don't say, but
Right.
my understanding is that a lot of that fund comes from Public Works, is that correct?
Oh, what do you mean? It's a public works fund. The way it's set up is if there's a deficit, then the
Money's not
utilities
coming
kick
from
in.
generating electricity entirely, because it doesn't even generate anything at this point.
Right, so like we would not, if don't want to generate electricity, then we would make these repairs that are budgeted for next year.
We would or would not make.
Would not make them.
Yeah. So I'm just flipping to my budget book here with the page marked with
And it's great, I want to keep this conversation going. We are down to about less than 15 minutes.
One more.
And I would like to make sure that other council members have a chance to weigh in on
When will
where
we
they
have-
see
When will we
this
have the
going.
study session on the hydroelectric plant?
Next month, but again, that doesn't affect the property tax rate, so it isn't anything.
No, but what it affects is if money from the waste, or from the water and sewer fund is going into this to support it, and it's a losing proposition, then that would not be spending money from that fund into something that we're losing money on.
Right.
I won't go on any more about that, but there's a lot to be, I think, investigated
And,
about.
and that's why it needs to be in a study session where you can
Another-
ask questions and.
One other recommendation that I would ask us to consider is council benefits. We have the option to elect to take advantage of the city's healthcare plan and the IMRF retirement fund. And
I don't think we have the IMRF, do we?
Yeah.
Oh, we do? Okay.
we have the option to. But I would recommend that we, and I don't know the process here, but we not budget for that by prohibiting city council from being able to take advantage of those benefits. I mean, it's not a pleasant decision. Well, I don't know if pleasant's the right word, but I think it is appropriate considering what we're facing. And I think that would lower down the tax rate to 6.1, right? Didn't I email you about that? So it doesn't get us to 4.99, but it does get us to 6.1.
So of the 100, I think it was, I don't remember the rate anymore, but I think council pay and benefits totals $150,000 in the 2020 budget, and about half of that is related to the benefits of IMRF. We only have one council person participating in IMRF, and then health insurance, about 75,000. And like Randy said, about 100,000 for each percent.
One for IMRF and how many for healthcare?
I don't remember off the top of my head, but I'm thinking 5.
Okay.
If we wanted to,
If I were to add, for benefits, I mean, to me, that's something to look at, but to look at reducing in the future. We've already passed our open enrollment period. It ended at the end of November. We do have open enrollment every November 1st through November 30th. While it would be a qualifying event to cancel someone's insurance, it certainly takes planning to do so. And so perhaps with the next election or newly seated council members, that it could be something, as you talk about phasing in, to maybe phase out the benefit just for consideration.
right, and I didn't know if we would have to pass some sort of ordinance, because I know that we're not allowed to, for example, vote on our own salary, right? You got to vote on increasing the next council's salary.
So there certainly would be some legal work, to be done in evaluating, how to cease benefits. And IMRF and health insurance would be separate issues.
Right.
I'd like to hear, Dylan, I hate to cut you off,
Oh,
but
yeah.
I'd like to hear from other council members where they would like to see the rate. And
I would like to see it at 4.5. 4.5 to 5.
Alderman Geenan? You have a,
I appreciate everything that's been said. I don't think anyone wants to see taxes raised. I know that I'm on a fixed income as well, and I am obligated to pay bills as too. I think the council is really taking seriously what that rate increase is going to look like. If the majority of council thinks 6 is too high, I think we can find a medium somewhere lower.
Mr. Hurt, did you give an indication?
Nope, I am not. Real quick, Stephanie, can I ask you a quick question? Going back to the property, back to the property tax allocation page, back from earlier in your presentation, there was a 2% variance with the library, recreation, and parks. If those were at a 1 instead of a 2, what kind of a difference would that make?
So if they were both 1, it would be about $40,000, or a little less than 0.5%. And then an impact to them both. They both have deficit budgets planned right now. various things going on. For instance, the library is utilizing reserves, as is parks.
Okay, thank
They
you.
are not balanced.
Is that 40,000 combined?
Yeah.
Yep, 2% is about 40,000 for each of those funds, so half of that would be, 20,000, so times 2, 40.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, I understand that nobody wants taxes raised, and there was a comment about if we raise them higher this year, then we can possibly look at 0 for next year. So I used to live at the poverty level and paycheck to paycheck and didn't always make it each time. And I can honestly say from that standpoint, dealing with a 3.9% tax increase this year, maybe a 3.5% one next year, is a whole lot easier for those people to adjust to than a big one. I mean, and I realize on a $100,000 home, it's like, the 6.6% is $4 a month. The 3.91 is like $2.50. But when you're struggling to make ends meet, that $2 or $1.50, that becomes a big deal. And so I think that's where I'm coming from. I'm not proposing a huge raise this year in the hopes that next year we have nothing. I think it's more palatable and easier for people to deal with if you have a small one that gives you time to adjust and see how you can make that happen.
I just want to make I hate to say one last comment, then I make another one. But, but just because what we're passing here and what we talk about is a percentage of else, doesn't mean that money is spent. You gotta remember, large expenditures come in front of city council on monthly basis, and a couple times a month. And then we have the options to continue to whether to nix an issue or project or not. Whether it be hiring somebody, we can give those indications, or replacing somebody. So I just want to reiterate that it's not the mindset and attitude that we approve a budget, whatever percent we talk about doing, that automatically means that money is spent and gone. Once again, as Stephanie mentioned, this last year, income was a little better than what we budgeted. We did not have to dig into the reserves as much as we thought we were going to last year. So it turned out, I won't say positive on the positive side, but better than what we thought. And I don't want to put the rosy glasses on and say, let's just budget thin and hope that happens again this year. But there's no doubt we can maybe make it aggressive and push ourselves to help that happen again next year. That if we do have to pull out of some, or budgeting point, like we're going to pull out of reserves, and as the year goes, continue to look at cost-saving issues. We don't have to solve all the problems tonight on where it's going to come from, as long as we're committed that we're going to push ourselves to cut those expenses as the year goes, is an opportunity. There's no guarantee, but it at least gives us opportunity and puts the pressure on us to make sure, us and the department managers, to work toward that goal. So I guess, reiterate that.
I can just add one thing, sort of in the same line of thought that you're mentioning. We do have some optimistic projects coming up that hopefully revenue stream will increase a little bit. But also, regarding the tax rate, once we vote and make that decision, that amount of money that the taxpayer is going to pay is fixed and out of their pockets. We can't go backwards on that.
You could lower it the next year, but yes.
Well, there's always next year, but I'm in agreement with Alderwoman Swanson. I'd rather see it lower 2 years in a row than higher 1 year, and then maybe lower, but we don't have any guarantee the next year. So I'm sticking with my below 5%.
Once
So
again,
how-
we're running out of time here, so
Okay.
we gotta.
So how many people would be in favor of 3.9, which was what was originally proposed back in, or is anybody adamantly against it? Just curious to see how close we are.
In favor of it or against it?
Oh, in favor of
Okay.
it.
But do you
No
mean
problem.
exclusively, or would that be okay in addition to?
We gotta figure out a number to have here
Yeah,
this
we gotta have
evening.
a proposal.
So that's something that we've talked about. I mean, we've kicked around, 4.5, a little higher, so that going to that 3.9, which is essentially 4%, is one more day of reserves, and one more day of reserves is not gonna make or break the city.
4.5.
That would be if you go to 4.5, I mean, so you're talking,
I would like to
Half
propose
a
a
day.
3.9 myself.
Would you repeat what you say?
Well, going from 4% to 4.5% is like 0.6 of a day of reserves. I mean, it's,
A sixth
in the
of a-
big scheme of things,
of a day?
sixth of a,
Okay.
well, 6/10 of a day.
Okay.
I mean,
So if everybody commits to buying gas in Rock Island,
You know, I do appreciate the transparent process we've had through this. I think if anything can be said, we've really hashed things through. Nothing's done kind of behind closed doors in a sense. Are we looking for raising hands? I don't know what we're,
Can't do a formal vote, obviously, until
right.
about 20 minutes from now or so.
Well, to answer Alderwoman Swanson's question, I would support anything that was below 5%, including 3.93, if that was the council's.
we just need to prepare a motion for the,
I'm
and
sorry.
we would need to prepare a motion, and we can't just whip it up on the,
so we
on
have
the
this
spot.
side, we have this side. How about that side?
You have potential that side.
That doesn't mean
2
I wouldn't
minutes.
support 4.5.
I'm not trying to put pressure on, but you got 2 minutes.
No, I don't,
No pressure at all.
I respectfully do not like 3.93, nor 4, nor 4.5. It feels like we're picking a number arbitrarily and is not being fiscally responsible.
Well, 3.93 was what was originally proposed to us.
I know, and
So
that's-
it's not being fiscally
So,
irresponsible.
real quick, that's your, Mark?
I like 4.5. I think it's doable. I know it's just a half a day, but I'm talking nickels and dimes. It is less stress on the department heads, and it gives us a little bit of space there for a contingency.
Dave?
I agree.
All right, well,
4.5.
Feels good.
what's that?
4.5.
All right,
Well, I think, 3.93 was what was originally presented by staff, so I think staff and department heads were comfortable with that, otherwise that would not have been the number that was brought to us. And I think where things kind of grew out of proportion was the thought that, okay, we'll raise it really high, and then next year it can be a 0, and that's really not practical. But I guess my feeling with the 3.9, it's not an arbitrary number just picked out of the sky because I like it. It's the number that was brought to us in October by staff, which is what staff had originally budgeted to, which is where staff was comfortable, which is why it was brought to us in the first place. And so that's why I would propose the 3.93, because staff is comfortable at that. Otherwise, that would not have been the amount that was brought to us.
Right, yeah, I mean, staff was planning to use reserves when they picked 3.93.
But as we go, so the budget's a fluid thing.
I know.
So as we go through the year and we're looking at capital improvement projects, if we decide we don't want to trim the tree canopy, we don't have to. If
Right.
we decide we don't want to give to half the things that we have going on, we can vote in March, April, May, and June that, hey, we don't want to do that. Just because it's there doesn't mean it gets spent. So it's a fluid process. And if we find that we're doing great, fine, we can do these things. But, I think to put the burden on taxpayers because there's some wants that we want to have happen isn't fair, especially when that was the number that was originally brought to us that everybody in the city was comfortable with.
All right.
Do I have to make a motion to adjourn?
Nope, it's open session, we don't, we are going to, I'm just gonna verbally make a comment, because some up here do need to take a little quick break. We heard of either long or short. So, we are gonna start.
Point of
We're
privilege,
2 minutes late now, we're gonna take 5 minutes, so we are gonna start a couple minutes late from the scheduled meeting. I apologize if those are out there listening to the public, but We will reconvene in about 5 minutes, please. Come on.